Director IIC, Mr. Srivastav, uh, distinguished members on the dais, and dear friends. Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to this inaugural WISCOMP dialogue on mediation. In collaboration with the IIC, we are delighted that the IIC has sort of offered its collaborative strength, and we are honored by the presence of Mr. Srivastav, who's always been very supportive of new and innovative programs here at the IIC. And a special welcome and thanks to our inaugural speaker, Neha Sangrajka, who is with us from Mozambique to mark a special beginning for us at WISCOMP. We enter our 25th year this summer, and it is something of a celebratory moment for us as we launch our series on mediation, curated and conceptualized by my colleague and friend, Dr. Shumona Dasgupta, herself an international mediator and an expert scholar practitioner on peace building, who, if I may say with some pardonable pride, cut her teeth in the field of peace building at WISCOMP some 24 odd years ago. Shumona has been associated with WISCOMP since 2000, initially as a full-time team member, and now, of course, she is an international research consultant, and she's curating this special series on mediation in WISCOMP's 25th anniversary year. She remains deeply invested in issues related to gender, peace, and security, on which she continues to publish, as well as on democratic practices and participatory research methodologies. She's a research partner with PRI in Asia and a number of other initiatives like the Calcutta Research Group, and which is a group of scholar activists working on issues. And she's been with INCOR, she's been with the advisory group of the International Conflict Research Institute. And there's a lot more to talk about Shumona, but she will be unfolding her talents as she walks us through this evening's programs. And for us, especially, I do want to say that today's lecture titled Mediation and Doing Things Differently, Converting Challenges into Opportunities, is a beginning and in some senses a coming together of 25 years of our work in the area of gender and peace building. We are also very thankful to scholars like Rita Manchanda, who is a longtime friend and a fellow traveler, and a renowned expert in the field of conflict and peace, and to Ritika Berry, well-known scholar and researcher and expert on Africa, and formerly senior fellow at the IDSA, who will share their responses after the talk. Shumona will chair the session and navigate us through the complexities of the terrain. The WISCOMP dialogues on mediation, and incidentally, WISCOMP, for those of you who don't know us, is not the acronym for an American corporation. It is Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace. And this series is envisioned as curated public lectures, discussions, workshops, interactive dialogues, and film discussions, performances, and installations that demystify the theory and practice of mediation as applied to the arena of peace building. As a South Asian peace building initiative of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, WISCOMP has over the years provided an interface between academics, practitioners, and policymakers on issues that are at the confluence of gender, of security, and of peace building. Above all, we attempt to nurture constituencies of peace through training, research, and praxis in areas such as multi-track diplomacy, peace advocacy, coexistence, and cross-border civil society dialogues. Our work focuses on the three foundational aspects of peace building: the structural, the relational, and the personal. And this reflects our work across sectors, be it in education, be it in the civil society space, be it with interaction with policymakers. And so we are really privileged to have such a distinguished audience with us. A very important watershed moment for us in India, of course, is the adoption in September 2023 of the Mediation Act, which received the President's assent in India, and which, by the way, our director has brought the entire copy of the Act. Knowing him, he must have read it from cover to cover, page to page, and so on. The sort of consummate senior bureaucrat that he has been. And this particular act was intended to facilitate mediation, both commercial and otherwise, and to encourage community mediation, which is a very important first step for India, which has seen conflicts at several levels, at societal levels, at intrastate levels, and of course, interstate. However, while the Act does provide for a clear statutory status to mediation in India, its practice is not new. We've had conventional methods of mediation through the Panch Parmeshwars. We've also had local adalats since 1987, the Jan Sunwais that we all are familiar with. And of course, we all are aware of the practice of Ho'oponopono in Polynesia and Ubuntu, which is really very much an African idea that originated in Africa. With the Act of 23, the implications and modalities of the mediation process have been spelt out, but the Act does have some shortcomings. While it is not evident if community-level peace mediation in what are called disturbed areas or conflict area within India fall under the scope of this statutory mediation, it is yet an opportunity to develop and flesh out the methodology of mediation here. We do have friends from the Vidhi Legal Center present here, and of course they are past masters at the act of in the practice of mediation. But what the Act does not provide for is community-level mediation for settling disputes on peace, harmony, and tranquility within local communities to be binding in law. This under Section 27, the mediated settlement agreements can be enforced like court judgments. However, under Section 49, government is immune from being a party in these matters. Largely, the government interventions still remain, as you would know, in areas that are commercial, although the international mediation agreements are not yet binding in the Indian context. So that leaves a whole world, in some senses, of challenges and opportunities for us to engage with this law afresh and try and see how we can use it in the area of peace mediation. Peace mediation is a new term relatively, especially in South Asia, although its practice, as I said, has been there for many centuries perhaps. It has not been envisioned in this particular framework of jurisprudence and law. And throughout the whole cycle of a conflict, peace mediation can intervene and sort of interface with other methods of peace building and reinforce practices that are meant to not just reduce violence, but to build and reinforce relationships. There are 4 specific features of peace mediation which distinguish it from other forms of mediation, and these include creating an inclusive process, ensuring that all components are gender sensitive, building trust, which is important in the process among various actors, and ensuring that the various peace efforts at different levels of society are interconnected, so that while there are several simultaneous tracks happening, they are in some senses buffeting and reinforcing one another. You are all familiar with the landmark UNSCR resolution 1325 that mandates the inclusion of women in all aspects of peace building, be it conflict prevention, management, reconciliation, and of course, relief and recovery. The 4 pillars that it is usually built on is prevention and participation, relief and recovery. And of course, a very important part of it is the participation of women in post-conflict arrangements, also in constitutional arrangements that move from situations of hierarchy and authoritarianism to more parliamentary and, or shall I say, democratic and inclusive uh, processes. 1325 and its sister resolutions emphasize these different aspects like participation and prevention, relief and recovery. And yet, there are at least 5 of them that frontally, shall I say, address the issues of mediation. Among the sister resolutions, as you know, there are 9 of them. All of them, there's a total of 10 resolutions, starting from 2009 to the latest one in 2019. 1325 has reinforced the need for women to be included in mediation processes, to make mediation processes themselves gender sensitive, and also to provide training and support and also adequate research to buttress these events. So, ensuring that all parts of a mediation process are gender sensitive is key to making any peace process sustainable, because we all know that in situations of conflict, women are differentially impacted uh, uh, as compared to men. And very often in conflict situations, when men are not around, it is left to the women to continue to hold the flock together at the community level and so on. And also simultaneously they face several kinds of violence, a continuum of violence, the violence of exclusion, and also physical violence and sexual assault. So 1325 as a group of resolutions is meant to protect women from the worst onslaughts of violent conflict and give them both voice and agency in bringing about a just peace. And so there are, of course, several issues around 1325, and that will be debated later, I'm sure, also by our distinguished panel. But suffice it to say that one of the interesting things that happened before 1325 and post 1325 was that the notion that peace is not an event, that it is a process, it's a fluid work in progress, began to gain traction more and more. The idea already existed because people did speak about structural causes of conflict rather than of overt violent conflict. But this idea that peace is not an event but a process gained traction. And what is particularly interesting is that 1325 plus and all the activities around it, both leading up to 1325, be it Beijing Plus 5, be it the Nairobi forward-looking initiatives, be it the Vienna Convention on Human Rights, the whole slew of initiatives at the UN were actually designed in some senses to open up this moment for women's agency to play itself out. And 1325 moved the idea of peacemaking away from purely peacekeeping activities of the blue helmets or a kind of a military operation. But several questions emerge about the nature and methods of mediation, because the other aspect or the other great impact of this entire discourse was that the notion of the negotiating table, the metaphor of the negotiating table itself became much more fluid. It was not static. It was something that was, again, a work in progress. Rita and I have talked about the importance of the metaphor of the negotiating table itself changing because of women's involvement in peace processes. Not something static, but something constantly that is reinventing itself, and that women around the so-called peace table are as important as women who are in the middle of it at all. Now, of course, there are several discussions about mediation processes themselves, whether the particular lens that is used is endogenous or exogenous. Is there more emphasis now in the UN on expertise, on sort of frameworks of engagement? Is it getting too technical? Is the political spirit being taken out of mediation process? And then of course there is, and that, are we looking at it too much in quantitative terms, in terms of outcomes alone? And there is, of course, the other process of insider mediation, working with outsider mediators to ensure that the larger political ethos and the spoilers, the mutually hurting stalemate ideas all enter into a discussion around mediation. Today, of course, the mediation field is extremely competitive and includes many actors, the UN, the NGOs, private individuals, regional organizations like the African Union, the EU, and so on. Anyway, I don't really need to go into all of that. But if you come in from a peace building perspective, mediation can only bolster methodologies to build peace, because at the basic level it's about local ownership of peace processes, it's commitment to long-term engagement. I think someone had used the term that it is neither reversible, that is irreversible once a peace process starts, and it cannot be stopped once it begins. But it can. We have seen, as you will learn from Neha's presentation, that there can be moments of setback, there can be hiatus, and then building back from what has been lost becomes a very, very arduous process. But as they showed in Mozambique, the will to peace survives all these reversals. So there's dialogue, there's inclusion, there's wide participation, bringing all stakeholders on board, learning from each other, walking into the shoes of the other, stepping into the shoes of the other, recognizing differences but building on commonalities. This is a whole range of things that constitute peace building. And mediation, along with peacekeeping, has now become in many ways the default option of the UN in conflict situations. And there have been large number of studies that have shown that peacekeeping alone, in the absence of mediation, has never yielded a stable and long-standing and satisfactory result. Peacekeeping alone does not work. It can help when mediation already is there to buttress it, to bolster it, and to build the space, to clear the space for adversaries to come together to have a common vision of the way forward. So in terms of our own space, in terms of our own region, what can we take away from ideas on mediation? Our region is home to almost every religion in the world, one of the world's densely populated regions. And here, religious and cultural traditions continue to influence daily life at the level of communities. And yet, this region has witnessed catastrophic violence. And no country, whether it is India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Maldives, of course, we know Afghanistan, and now Myanmar or Burma, have proved resilient or resistant to it. So is it because violence is a rather continuous phenomenon taking place at all times along fractures of caste, class, religion and gender, age and region, that makes it difficult for us, especially in our part of the world, to focus on this violence or that violence or this genocide or that genocide? Has it become the very condition of our living? So much so that it has turned out that we tend to normalize it in everyday political context. This is a question we need to ask ourselves. And that, have we developed a deep-seated ambivalence towards violence? This is another question in the context of mediation that comes up for those of us who live and inhabit this region. And it's really also interesting that among the oldest and the most recent systematic reflections on nonviolence, those of Jainism, Buddhism, and of course later Gandhi, are what we in India like to call our own. And as Ananya Vajpayee has said, this is an extraordinary conundrum, because the difference between how we live and what we claim to idealize represents that impassable gap between the most unceasing practice of violence and the most sustained theorization of nonviolence. And this is a contradiction, this is a conundrum, and hopefully when processes of mediation are formal processes of mediation are institutionalized and accepted across the length and breadth of our region, we will be able to develop ways in which we can actually be in dialogue rather than talking past each other. So why is the presence of Neha Sangrachka in our midst today is particularly significant as an inaugural speaker. We are grateful that, as I said, she's traveled all the way from Mozambique, and that we can benefit from her expertise. Let us not forget that Africa has the largest number of networks of women mediators compared to any other continent. They have carved their place so meticulously that it is no longer possible to convene peace negotiation absent women there today. Neha worked very closely with Kofi Annan and Garsa Machel in Kenya on the peace process during the post the electoral crisis of 2007. In Mozambique, Neha was on the UN team of mediators and played a crucial role in talks that led to a ceasefire and constitutional amendment to deepen decentralization, and the Memorandum of Understanding on Military Affairs, the agreement on the cessation of hostilities, the historic Maputo Accord for Peace and National Reconciliation in 2019, the DDR processes, the disarmament and demobilization of 5,221 combatants, former combatants, resulting in a gender-centered process and a negotiated historic decree to extend pension rights to this group. She embellished her graduate work in legal studies and international relations with a practitioner's engagement that is truly outstanding. As author, negotiator, mediator, and conflict sensitivity advisor involved in high stakes negotiations, she brings a rich repertoire of experience and expertise. Her work with women mediators across the Commonwealth, the Geneva Center for Security Studies, and multilateral platforms like Humanitarian Dialogue, the African Union, the EU, all of this bears ample testimony to her stellar contribution to the field of peace building, and we are honored to have her in our midst. Many of us know that the Kenyan National Dialogue and Reconciliation process, steered by Kofi Annan, was a watershed in working towards a progressive Kenya from a divided past, as they say, to a shared future. Along with women like Machel, Neha's role was significant. Similarly, in Mozambique, the attempts to build reconciliation beyond unabating violence. Right from 1992, the country has seen periods when they were going back and forth into talks and coming out of talks, and several attempts at constructive dialogue in 2013 and 14, including the Avenida process. I think you were involved partly with that process, in which I think Jonathan Powell, right? EU reps in South Africa and former presidents of Botswana and Tanzania, again in 2000 to 2016. However, these remained somewhat short-lived, with frequent lapses into violence and intransigence between the National Resistance Forces, RENAMO, and the government. But the will to build peace was sustained, and the accord reached in 2019 is a testament to the tenacity and ambition, and imagination of the mediators group, which included the Swiss ambassador, Mirko Manzoni, as the personal envoy of the Secretary General himself, and Neha, among others, to provide good offices, mediate, and set up DDR processes and take the adversaries along. And the watershed accord is thanks to their effort. And interestingly, this was probably one of those few efforts that worked through the COVID pandemic and sustained. So today, I think Mozambique has shown itself as a country committed to peace, perhaps even a global leader for peace. And the role of women like Neha need to be acknowledged and celebrated. And I'd just like to add here as a kind of subtext, if I may, that she has attempted in her work to provide an alternative vocabulary that is not global north centric. And that is why we look to her to give us her insights, because as we struggle to find our own processes, we will have to look inward, we will have to examine our violence, but we also have to develop a conceptual vocabulary that resonates with the people of the global south. I'm sorry I've gone on a bit longer than I was intended to, but over to you, Neha, and thank you once again for being here.